to Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable where we discuss all things fire service related. We meet each Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and tonight our topic is we're going to do a review of a call that involved a chemical suicide. So it is something that all first responders have to know about. We're going to discuss an incident that actually occurred here tonight. I'm having a challenge with the YouTube comments, but we're going to put this up here anyway. If you are watching us live on YouTube, if you leave a YouTube comment, we will try to get that into the discussion, but I am having some challenges with that tonight. So let's get some introductions and we'll get going. So my name is Peter Lamb. I'm the author of PeteLamb.com, and I am the host of the Firefighter Training podcast. We'll introduce the panel tonight, and then we'll get going. So Adam, say hello.
Good evening. Adam Ganoy, captain with the Kellogg Township Fire Department here in Kellogg, Iowa.
Thanks, Adam. I appreciate you being here. And our presenter tonight, Greg, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Greg Howard. I'm the Deputy Fire Chief for the Dashwood Volunteer Fire Department, Vancouver Island, BC, Canada.
Thanks, Greg. Joe Starnes.
Joe Starnes, Kings Mountain, North Carolina, better known as other side of Shelby. Work for Oak Grove Volunteer Fire Department and then hang out with the team from the KTF, Kill the Flashover Group.
Yeah, and just might be worth noting that Joe just came back from an international speaking event. Hopefully we can drag some info out of him on a future episode. John, say hello.
Hi, John Cagno, North Providence Fire Department, Battalion Chief retired.
All right, thanks, John. Last but not least, Bob.
Good evening, everybody. Rob Fling. I'm the Chief of Department with the Dick Sills Fire Department and also the founder of FacePeaceOn.com.
All right, excellent, excellent. So we're going to get our presentation started. A couple of disclaimers here. I want to let Greg get a little bit into his presentation, then we'll take questions as we can. Again, I am struggling with the YouTube link. Feel free to use those YouTube comments anyway, and even if I have to go in post-episode to review them, I will do that, try to get you some answers. So without further ado, let's get to Greg from Dashwood. Greg, why don't you take us through this incident? Let me, I just took you offline there. Sorry about that.
No trouble.
All right.
Yeah, this was actually outside of my jurisdiction, and I was out for a walk with the family. So I had two young kids and my wife. We went to a local regional park, went for a hike, left the parking lot. We were gone for about 45 minutes, and when we returned, there was a vehicle with signs in the windows. So this is an interesting topic because it's one of those things. If everybody remembers when clan labs were starting up and you've been to a meth lab fire and that sort of thing, you know, people got in over their heads because we didn't recognize the dangers that were there. And I think this is a great subject to share with everybody because it goes along the same lines. If we can respond to something and we're a little bit complacent about what it is, that it has potential to seriously harm the first responders and also bystanders in the area. So is the screen share up working properly there now, Pete?
Yes, everybody got it? Yeah, everybody's giving me the nod. Everybody's got it. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I will start out in what is a chemical suicide, and one of the reasons I was able to recognize it was our Occupational Health and Safety Committee brought this up as a topic about 2 years ago, and I'll be honest, at the time I thought, oh, we won't see one of these in our area, but it's a chemical suicide. They're known as detergent suicides. It involves self-inflicted exposure to toxic gas in a confined space. So typically the confined spaces, for the ones that now I've dug in a little bit, are usually vehicles because they're easy to seal up and they have a small volume. But they've also been documented in closets and bathrooms, hotels, so you could be exposed to a response to one of these things anywhere. The gases are created by mixing consumer products and household chemicals. The techniques appear to have originated in Japan, and some people also call it a Japanese suicide. it's becoming more and more popular. It's started in North America. I don't know when the first documented case was. I know here in British Columbia, after I looked into it, was just after we had the G8 summit, and we get about 3 per year that are reported throughout the province. The 2 most common gases that are used are hydrogen sulfide and hydrogen cyanide. We'll get into that in a little bit, and if you're not used to working with them. Hydrogen sulfide, we have a lot of workers trained in it because it's a common industrial gas for people working in the oil field. Again, I guess I want to make the big point here that this isn't really an abnormal hazmat response. The important part is just going to be recognizing what you have before you expose yourself to anything or your responders. Number of signs here for, bear with me for a sec, Pete.
No, that's fine.
Here we go. We talked about this a little bit, but recognizing some of the signs as you go up. So they need to have a fairly confined space, something the volume of about a passenger vehicle or smaller bathrooms work as well. If you're talking about a structure, you can expect to see some kind of attempts to cover ventilation. So, of course, if they're in a bathroom, the ventilation attempts to block the ventilation will probably be on the inside. But towels stuffed under cracks, taped windows, vehicles, there's sometimes tape over the vents. You see an unresponsive person typically with no signs of trauma. And the one that I saw, there was bleeding, hemorrhaging from the mouth and nose. The sites that people are going to, so people are getting the recipes for these sort of things off the internet. If you do a little bit of research on them as a training officer, that sort of thing, you'll see that most of them are fairly responsible, and they all recommend that people put up signage so that bystanders don't get hurt and first responders don't get hurt. However, you know, someone in the state of mind who's committing suicide may or may not go through those steps, so it's important to recognize the other parts. Suicide notes are common. I've got some pictures we'll bring up here in a bit. So look for empty cleaning supply, pesticide or paint containers. And there's 2 different smells that can accompany the different gases, but it's important to know that 20 to 40% of the public, we don't have the correct gene to smell. And also the smells can be quickly overcome. The gases themselves reduce our ability to smell at a certain level, so the odors are not a reliable indicator. And to recognize some of the symptoms that come along with the 2 gases, because if you have people in the area that weren't exposed to high levels, that can also be a sign of a chemical suicide. So this is what I saw coming back into a parking lot, and 2 things that I recognized almost right away, and only because of the work of our OSH committee, were the signs in the windows and then the small bag by the back tire. So the big danger to bystanders and first responders would be a concentrated release of gas from opening the confined space, which would be seeing someone in distress or unresponsive in a vehicle and then opening the car, breaking the window, or that sort of thing, and being faced with a concentrated release of the gas. An interesting part to this, because one of the members on my department works for the coroner service, and they moved the bodies. We did a little bit of research after, and contaminated bodies to be removed can off-gas for quite a while. So it's not over after the call's done. You have quite a bit of work to do here to make sure you don't take your hazmat event and send it down the road just to hurt other people. Notes I've got here on my slide: the materials used in the suicide can continue to off-gas for extended periods of time after the initial generation, and toxic gases may remain in the victim's lungs, clothing, or in the confined space. These gases are lethal at very low concentrations and can't be easily detected. Even transportation of the body by the local coroner is problematic. And so if you suspect a chemical suicide, follow your local protocols and guidelines, take precautions, and wear proper PPE, so a minimum of SCBA and bunker gear. I guess the big part here is once you recognize it for what it is, it's like any other hazmat incident. I'm going to cover a little bit the two most common gases. By far, the most common product is hydrogen sulfide, or H2S. It's most common because it's easy to get a hold of the common household products to create it. It's typically made by getting a product that has a high sulfur content and then mixing it with hydrochloric acid to create the H2S. So symptoms in low exposures are respiratory irritation, coughing, nausea, vomiting, headaches, disorientation, tremors, suffocation, and then coma, and finally death. And the important thing to know from a first responder point of view is when these guys are doing this properly in their vehicles, death is almost instantaneous. They say death above 1,000 parts per million can happen within one breath. And from what I've researched and understand, a typical parts per million count in a passenger vehicle exceeds 3,000 parts per million. What have I got here? Next one. So hydrogen cyanide is less common, and it's less common because it's more difficult for people to pick up the cyanide, but it's produced in much the same way. It's cyanide producing gas is made using an acid source, and cyanide salts such as sodium cyanide or potassium cyanide. And that for the incidents using hydrogen cyanide gas is more difficult to deal with because it passes membranes, so you can absorb it through your skin and your eyes. The smells typically for the two, for hydrogen sulfide, is the rotten egg smell that we're used to smelling from sewer gas or that sort of thing. It's a relatively easy gas to detect because most 4-gas detectors, I know we carry the equipment to detect sewer gas H2S. And on hydrogen cyanide, you require more specific. I'm not a real hazmat guy, so I know we don't carry the hydrogen cyanide detection equipment on the truck. For small spills, when you get into the ERG, the isolation areas for both these are fairly small. And when they're done in a car or a small closet, you're talking about 200 feet for worst case. And then, of course, watch your wind and that sort of stuff. You know, a big thing with these chemical suicides are when, in my case, I called this in immediately as a hazmat incident to our dispatch center. But I think, you know, an important point to make is to do some education and work on policy right in the dispatch centers so that call takers are trained to recognize signs of the chemical suicide. That way they can give appropriate instruction to bystanders on scene and also kind of set the scene for crews coming in. Yeah, so if a chemical suicide is suspected, first responders should follow your local guidelines, wear appropriate PPE, and as soon as possible get in touch with your local hotline. This isn't going to be anything new for anybody who's kind of in the done any kind of operations in hazmat, but it all starts with doing a size up. So look for your indicators, like we were talking about, the signs, sealed off vents, unresponsive people with no signs of trauma, signs of the materials used for mixing. Some of the really common things are there's usually roughly a 1 gallon mixing container where initially the acids are poured into a 5 gallon container because it's quite reactive when the mixing is done. and the product will foam up. So in the vehicle, in the picture, in the Ford Ranger pickup, there was about a 5-gallon open top pail in the passenger side of the vehicle, and the occupant was laying across from the driver's side across both, and that was visible from the outside. In this incident, that vehicle had been on the scene probably less than 30 minutes talking to other people in the parking lot, and there was absolutely no detectable odors to me in the area when I first got there. You want to follow by securing the area, so consider securing the area by evacuating or sheltering everyone nearby. You know, that's a tough decision sometimes depending on the environment and the sort of population you have, but decide to evacuate or shelter in place. Consider the concentrations that you have, your population size, whether the contamination occurred indoors or outdoors, and then the volume of the structure that you're dealing with, wind speed and direction. And obviously work from the upwind side. Once you get down to the mitigation stage, this is one of those ones where you're more worried about bystander than the initial occupant of the vehicle, because it's very effective and very lethal. So once somebody has started this process, it's unlikely that you're going to get a good save from it. It just comes down to proper PPE and ventilation, and figuring out if you've stopped your gas generation, so you can watch further reactivity of what you have in your mixing containers. Air monitoring, so figure out which products you have, and then make sure before you send anybody in, you're ready to decontaminate people that are coming out of your hot zone. Rescue and recovery. Again, this is tricky because you're going to have a contaminated recovery. So you have to be ready before you begin the operation to decontaminate, before you pass off this to whoever the next service agency is going to be. And then protecting evidence. It's, you know, they like to call the fire department the evidence eliminators. So make sure we're not hosing off you know, possible footprints or anything like that, because though it may be a suicide, it's also potentially a crime scene. And additional risks. So, you know, I'm going to go back and use that description I had in the beginning there again, where when we started to go to these clan labs and we were finding booby traps and these sort of things, someone has made the decision here to take their own life, and you don't know their mindset. So keep your head on a swivel and be aware of everything that's around there. You've got to, in the event it's a homicide rather than a suicide, you may still have someone in the area, and you know, we've seen too much of that lately with first responders being targeted, and secondary devices and things like that. Kind of short and sweet little presentation there. I'm happy to answer some questions. The majority of my presentation, the information came from the U.S. Department of Health and Services and the Chemical Hazards Emergency Medical Management site. So I put the links up in the end here. And if anybody would like to use this Google Slides presentation with their department, please feel free to do so. I've included the link on the bottom. And copy it and edit it however you'd like to.
All right. Greg, why don't you pop back up on screen, and I've got, we'll start some panel discussion if you don't mind. So my question is, you happen to be there with your family, which is really kind of, you're stumbling upon the incident. What is your typical response? What was sent to this incident initially, Greg?
Yeah, so this was outside my area, Pete. So the way our 911 system works here is the call takers, the RCMP, so that would be our federal police, manage the call taking in the area. From there I was put through to ambulance dispatch. And ambulance dispatch enters the notes into into the computer, and it goes off to fire and police, and so everyone's picking up the notes on it. Right away, I identified it as a hazmat and a chemical suicide, so that went out to everybody. It was in a smaller fire department. I think they've got a single hall and I think just one engine company. When they arrived on scene, they were the first agency to arrive on scene, and they, it's probably typical of a lot of smaller fire departments, but they only had a number of people trained just to an awareness level with hazmat, and they were very, very conservative. So we'd done a little bit when we first recognized it. So my wife took the kids away and took our pickup truck and moved it up to the entrance to the park and stopped traffic, and then I stayed upwind of the car just to make sure there was other vehicles parked in the immediate area, to make sure people walking back into the parkade or the parking lot area wouldn't get in close proximity to the car. And the response time wasn't overly quick. I think we had 10 to 15 minutes before we had a response there from the local fire department. They had the incident command was set up quite a ways away, and I worked with the truck captain who came up to the front end, and because they had a limited training in hazmat, I just helped them through calling the emergency guidelines or the Camtrack hotline, and we established some hot zones and worked with them with that sort of thing. They started a regional hazmat team down from Up Island.
And what is that hazmat team? How far away from that time-wise? What does that mean in real life, Greg?
Probably 45 minutes.
All right. And so how is the decision made? Who decides and when? Was it a discussion between RCMP, yourself to some degree, even though you're not involved, but yourself and the first responders? Who decides to go open the door and when? How long did that take to make that decision? And if you could help us with that, how did that come about?
Yeah, well, fairly early on, I put the Camtrack advisor on speakerphone with the truck captain, and he wasn't aware of the service available, so just there identified myself to the operator and what we had, and she ran through safe distances, and she jumped right to the potential rescue side. So she said, we've got some flammability hazard with this, but primarily it's the gas, and SCBA should be enough to affect a rescue. But by that point, we'd already realized that we had it was a recovery and not a rescue. So we made the decision to wait. I'd left the scene before the hazmat team went in, but I spoke to, he's a deputy chief I know from Up Island managing that team, and we had a discussion on how he was going to manage that. So really quite simple, just a PPV fan, and open it up, let everything gas out, stay back, and let time mitigate the situation.
Right, right. Okay, great. And when you say Camtrack, for my folks here, we're talking about Camtrack, essentially.
Yeah, it's the Canadian version, yeah.
Exactly, exactly. The other thing is that when you don't know what to do, if you don't have an issue of what to do, obviously DOT Guidebook 111 would be, mixed, unknown quantity, whatever. That's one of the places you want to start the discussion, certainly, to be able to come up with a plan and move in. So Guidebook 111, if you didn't know what to do, that would be a good place to start looking, certainly. So questions from the panel for Greg?
I got a question for Greg.
Sure, go ahead, John.
Cool, John.
Do you people have like a local WMD law enforcement team in the area as well?
No, nothing like that.
Because obviously after the initial actions that are taken by the first responders, and being that it is a crime scene, I know in our area we would probably opt to have them respond. they have similar capabilities, and we would probably turn something like that over to them,
Yeah.
just like we would do like with a meth lab.
We've got fairly limited hazmat teams on the island, and I'm sure it works the same way for you guys, but the majority of our hazardous material spills are handled by contract agencies. So once, if someone is transporting a hazardous material, they need to have a plan in place for mitigating that in the event of an incident. So for us, it's typically we're on scene for a short amount of time to work in a very, we're making sure we keep people back at a safe distance, or keeping things from going down storm drains and that sort of thing until a contractor arrives. But from a WMD sort of response, we would probably get something out of one of the 2 local military bases, although I've never had to deal with that directly.
Yeah, in some states, the WMD teams act as like, they're sort of a combination agency. They don't only do WMD, but they'll do med labs and stuff like that. So that, I think that'd be an option, because it is a potential crime scene, and law enforcement presence is going to be there. I'm sure they're going to want to muscle their way into that, as well. So
we do have, and we've assisted them before, where the RCMP come in with the Clan Lab team, but they're off island, and their response time. We had a drug lab that blew up a house and gave life-threatening injuries to 3 people, but that team didn't arrive until the next day. So I imagine they could have mustered them sooner, but the equipment is off island, so while they can get a limited amount of equipment in, probably via helicopter, the trucks and the trailers need to come on the ferries.
Excellent, excellent. Rob, any questions from you? You're a cyanide guy. You've done a lot of work in that area. I don't know if you're going to talk about metering, but I'll talk about that if you want. But Rob, go ahead. Anything from you?
No, a couple of things that I liked about Greg's presentation was size up on this is key, and especially not to have tunnel vision. You walk up to a car, maybe somebody didn't put that note up, and a note is key. But if you don't have a note and you're in EMS, you get an unconscious, somebody in a car unresponsive. What are you thinking? Diabetic, alcohol overdose, heroin overdose. Where you walk up, you see somebody who's, obviously not breathing. If you have that tunnel vision and you go and open that door real quick, now all of a sudden you have a big problem. Take a look around before you open that car door. You're going to see the signs that Greg was talking about. And it's slow. At this point, it's slow down, not speed up. Take your time, make the right decisions, call the right people in. And it's, like he said, it's a recovery. It's not a rescue at this point. I've actually never heard of anybody surviving one of these. I've never heard of a botched attempt at one of these. Normally, you find them, they're in a lone parking lot, and they've been there for a considerable amount of time. And like Greg said, the body does off gas after a considerable amount of time.
Yeah. Have you had any of these, Rob? Have you experienced these?
I have not in my town, but I have heard of them across the island, yes. Right.
Yeah, the other thing that we're talking about, and Greg alluded to it, but I just want to magnify it a little bit. If you have in my particular area where John and I are, Massachusetts, New England area, we got a lot of resources. We have full-fledged hazmat teams that can come in. We also have decontamination units. And so the decontamination unit would be well suited to handle this situation. However, the screwing up the crime scene, right? Decontamination, we generally think of gross decons, stripping clothes, lots of water. That is going to make the crime scene or the incident scene, not necessarily a crime, incident scene more complicated. I was also going to make the point that some fire departments, certainly around here, are now carrying cyanide meters. I think one of the choices, right?
I have one right on my radio strap. I have a CO meter and a hydrogen cyanide meter.
Right, and I think that the cyanide meter, for those departments that are carrying those for structural firefighting, you know, there's another tool. We don't often think about what else that tool will do. Well, I got cyanide meters for structural firefighting. Well, quite frankly, they could come into play here very easily. I think I think what strikes me about these incidents, we've had a couple locally. We did have one in an apartment. I have never managed one of these myself, but we did have one locally in an apartment and a couple in vehicles. And the issue really is that I think you could be tricked into this pretty easily. I can see a couple of ambulance guys from the fire department opening the door. I think the scenarios that Rob presented, the alcohol intoxication, we are just here in New England, as well as the rest of the country, we're suffering a heroin epidemic. People are dying with the needles in their arm. Everybody's on this push to give Narcan quickly. You can save somebody's life. And I could just see an ambulance person, a firefighter medic, getting tripped up with this pretty easily.
We actually have a program where you know, the police officers are carrying Narcan now. We actually have a community Narcan program where you can get trained to carry Narcan on your person, and that's really dangerous when you think about it. Not from saving from somebody from a heroin overdose, it's a help. But if somebody was to go up onto a situation like this and have absolutely no training past how to use a nasal Narcan, you know, they open the door. Now all of a sudden you have 2 or 3 victims, and now you're overwhelmed from the start. With the hydrogen cyanide and the metering of it, one of the things that we need to remember with hydrogen cyanide is it has a cumulative effect on the body. So even though you might have come under the effect of hydrogen cyanide on numerous occasions at a structure fire, you know, this could be possibly even a low dose of hydrogen cyanide to you personally at this level could be fatal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good point. Good point, Rob.
You know, Chief, if I might jump in, when you were saying about the ambulance crew pulling up, usually you get law enforcement getting these calls first, arriving first. You know, they get you know, the typical suspicious vehicle in a parking lot, somebody slumped over the wheel. They're pulling up first. You know, and their situational awareness is not like our own. So I go back to what Rob was saying. You know, and you know, the first thing that happens is you're pulling up to something like this where you have not only the victim but law enforcement now getting involved. Just on an investigation mode, opening the door, not seeing a note if there is a note. Now we got a problem.
Yeah, in fact, the initial officer that showed up at this scene put on a gas mask and walked right up to the car. I mean, at that point, I don't think we were off-gassing very much, but Rob, you can probably help me out with this, but I don't think the gas mask is going to do him any good. He needs a positive pressure air supply.
Yeah, you know, being in the fire service, it's a regular gas mask is not something that we would normally wear. I don't know what they're rated to be honest with you. I know they give them to the NYPD officers, specifically the transit cops carry them on their belt. You know, hydrogen cyanide is something that if you were going to do some type of terrorist activity, you know, is definitely an option. Does the gas mask take care of that? Well, the different kinds of levels and different types of gas masks, I guess they do make some that would filter some of that out. But, you know, SCBA is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, when you're talking about cartridge masks, right, your cartridge is good for certain chemicals under certain concentrations.
Correct.
So there's certainly, as you know, as Rob said, it's not something I'm going to put on my face, but if the police are trained, you know how I always beef and complain on my podcast about taking action. I would ask all of us here, go to Firefighting Today after tonight. Go to Firefighting Today, grab this video link, and share it with your local law enforcement officers. Hey, we had to, you know, make awareness, right? We can stand here and talk about it. Our viewers that are listening to us now, again, I apologize if you're leaving YouTube comments. We are just unable to retrieve them tonight due to a technical problem. But the viewers that are out there, share this video after the fact with your local law enforcement folks. Adam, any comments from you? I'm not putting you on the spot. Any comments, suggestions? Is this something you had heard of before?
Yeah, we've talked about it here in our department, and it's something we haven't dealt with yet. I did work with somebody at a previous job that they've actually had two of these in their jurisdiction, so it's happening here, but it's just not really heard of. But no, this is great info for me and stuff I can take back to our firehouse because we do EMS here also.
Great, great. Okay, Joe Stearns, I'd like to reach over to you because Joe, you've got this set of phrases. You've got an action plan, a thinking plan that you talk about an awful lot in fire behavior. And you talk about it in structural fire attack. Why don't you just go through that thought model that you have, that process you have, and see how it might apply to this particular incident? It's more versatile than it is for just fire behavior. So, Joe, can you take us through that model?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. Can you hear me okay?
I can, actually. In the Joe Stearns Kill the Flashover control room, I might add.
Yeah, I like that one.
It's better than my meteorology stuff, I can tell you.
Anyway, the phraseology is just with all the whining and griping about acronyms, this is probably not going to go over real well. But
hang on 1 second, Joe. Can somebody on the panel, can we mute up? I'm getting a slight echo from Joe, so let's mute up if we can, and then go back at it, Joe. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll turn mine down a little bit too. The phraseology is detect, then define, then isolate, favorably influence, and then restore the environment. So detection is really the big key in this. We can trip up early detecting this. I was going to ask Chief Howard, what did you have a chance to read the note? Did you see the note?
I did. You know what I'll do? I'll pull that slide back up and I'll put it up while you're talking, Joe, and you should be able to read it from my slide. So carry on, and I'll do that.
Yeah, and the reason I said that was, any time we go into a area where there is no collaboration of what the problem is, we need to understand what our processes are to detect that we're going to be okay. And for instance, in hazmat, if we have to go into an environment that's been declared a hazard material area, we would wear our highest level of protection to do that until we knew what the problem was. So detection is a big deal. And then once we do that, we have to define it. We sample, we look at it, we define the risk model that we're taking and how we're going to mitigate that. And then we would isolate it. I noticed with reading about a little bit about this beforehand, hydrogen cyanide sulfide is like 100 feet isolation area in the 111 guide, and the cyanide poisoning is 200 feet in the guide. So not knowing what it is would be the maximum level. So we detect, define, isolate, and then we favorably influence. In this case, it would take a hazmat team or somebody with qualifications and protective equipment to be able to do that. And then the last one is to restore the environment, which is including the decon of the people associated with it, the decon of the equipment that was exposed to anything that had to do with the scene, and so forth. So it's detect, define, isolate, favorably influence, then to restore the environment. Chief, is that kind of what we were trying to get to?
Yeah, that is exactly what I wanted, Joe. Thank you for that. And again, I like that model that Joe uses because it is applicable to so many things. It really is. You could use that in a lot of situations. If you weren't careful, you could probably use that in a leadership class if you weren't careful, because you could probably use some of those very same things at the same time.
Yeah, so, it's probably a good facilitation model, whether it's human or inanimate.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. let me, all right, so I have a question coming in by Hangouts. Bear with me for this, and this question goes right to, okay, so the question is, and I don't know if you can shed any light on this, anybody on the panel, I'll start with Greg. The question is, what about when you decide it's a crime scene, Homeland Security, whatever, evidence collection, instead of EMS, usually recovery or hazmat? When you decide, you know, is the body evidence? Is the well, obviously the containers are, but is the body itself? When do we shift from being EMS versus that kind of thing? Anybody want to take a shot at that? And Greg, you can stop the screen share if you'd like.
Okay.
That's what I was referring to earlier, Pete. You know, this would be a good time for you know, your law enforcement WMD teams to interact. You know, once your initial hazmat work is done, your decon, now you're assuming that it could be a crime scene. You know, they have the training and the equipment to jump into this thing.
Yeah, and I'm with you locally, John, on that. But when you're saying that, Adam's going, "What the heck is he talking about?" I don't even know. Right? Rob's got some good stuff. Rob, on the island, do you have any police agencies that would jump in?
Our emergency service police officers are hazmat trained. So you know, with the arrival of a sector car, if I was to arrive first and notice I had a situation like this, like I said before, now it's time to slow down. And start amassing the teams that I'm going to need to take care of this. Unfortunately, it is probably a recovery, and you know, I'm thinking, and I know from a hydrogen cyanide standpoint, but you know, is there actually an EMS treatment that we could save this gentleman or lady? You know, hydrogen cyanide, we would have to use the cyano kit immediately, because no matter how much oxygen we give this person, it's not reaching the cells because the chemicals are keeping the oxygen out of the cells. So, you know, is it a point, even if it's a viable patient, what do we do for the patient? I'm not really quite sure, to be honest with you. But if it was, you know, an obvious recovery, honestly, I would probably just step back, wait till my resources all got there, and we would form a game plan from that point.
Yeah, it's a time incident. You're going to be on scene for several hours here, or maybe fire is going to back away at some point. As Greg said, you know, sometimes we are lousy at demobilizing. We don't tend to leave real well when we get involved in incidents. And you're right. At some point, you may have to dive out of it. Any other comments from the panel? Anything else we need to discuss? I want to say thank you, Greg. This was great. I appreciate you sharing. I think it was unique that you were off duty and kind of stumbled upon this incident, if you will, at the time. Thank God your wife
and handled it properly.
Safe. Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's the key. Yeah.
You know, we got a couple minutes, I think, before the end, and that brings up a whole other thing because you know, you roll up on something in your fire truck, and you're kind of wearing your virtual suit of armor because it's the day job. And it's interesting. The times you know, I've had emotional responses to calls. You know, you walk up on this, the pager hasn't gone off, and boom, there it is. Or you watch a car go off the road in front of you, and that sort of thing. It's different, you know, when you're used to showing up in the fire truck. And I don't know. I definitely, after I left, and I thought, oh, geez, you know, I had my kids with me and my wife with me and that sort of thing. It's a different thing. Probably other guys on the panel have had similar things. So it's worth talking around the table about maybe a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. It's when you are not in your normal environment, quote unquote, when you're not expecting to find the incident and you stumble on it. I think that's an interesting one. I think that's an interesting point.
You know, I like to say, this is when we talked about slowing down. I think it was Rob that said it. This is one of them type of things when you pull up. It's a great example of that rapid prime decision making process. You know, use your intuition. You know, and take immediate action based on what you're not seeing or what you are seeing to make a rapid decision to do maybe nothing, step back.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I agree. Anything else from the members of the panel? Okay, I think we did it. We had a short one tonight, folks. I appreciate everybody viewing with us. Again, I apologize for the technical problem that we had this evening, but hope you will join us again next week. Well, wait a minute, before I get carried away, is next week the holiday week? Is that Columbus Day weekend or not? I think it is.
I think it is.
I think it is Columbus Day weekend, so we may in fact take a pass on that, look for notices to go out. But if it is Columbus Day weekend, and I believe it is, there will be no show next Sunday. So we will take a pass on that. As we close here tonight, I want you to think about the fact that it was Firefighters Memorial Sunday. Take some time, look at some of the events that took place in Emmitsburg. I think it's important that we did this show about attempting to prevent harm to firefighters while it is National Firefighters Weekend. So when we say never forget, this is one of those actions that we can take to make sure that we don't forget. We want to make sure that no one else gets hurt in the process. So take some time, look at firehero.org, look at those ceremonies that took place. Chief Whitley, that's usually on the panel, is actually in Emmitsburg at the ceremonies this weekend. So think about those folks, and think about our brothers and sisters down in South Carolina that are getting pounded tonight, activating states of emergency operating shelters, and think about those folks as we move to our next session. So we will be back certainly, and we ask you to join us then. Thank you, everyone, and good night.